colored fabric, which is why I will go over it in chalk pencil if it's kind of hard to see like this. So, but if it's on darker fabric, you really see it pop. So like you can kind of see right there, whoops, there's like that faint little line that you made by tracing your outline. And it shows up a lot better in person than on camera. So I hope y'all don't think I'm like lying to you here. I'm sorry. But I'm going to grab a chalk pencil and trace this over just so I can see it a little better. And then we will cut it out. But again, if you're having trouble, like if this isn't working for you, especially for really simple designs, then you can just cut it out and trace it normally. If it's a design like the shield that is symmetrical, you don't even have to worry about reversing it and you can trace it on the back. But if it's not, you want to pay attention to that. So I'm just going over and tracing that little line that I made with the chalk pencil just so it's easier to see. And I will especially do this if I had like details on the inside that I want to keep, because as you work with it, it's going to be harder to keep track of, you know, where all your lines are. So you want to really make them stand out. And you may have to even go over it with the chalk again later if you find that it's disappearing, like with your little details. And again, like someone asked, if you wanted to draw your own design, this is where a chalk pencil is really helpful because it's really almost like a pencil and you can kind of just doodle in here and make your design. Or again, you can flip it over and draw on the paper on the back with a normal pencil. So now we're going to cut it out. And I tend to use like these smaller scissors for cutting out designs just because I want to get like more control and kind of closer up to things. But if you have a really big piece, you can use bigger scissors. It's whatever you feel comfortable with. Any more questions while I'm cutting this out? You may notice like where I kind of pressed too hard and it came through the paper a little bit, there's a pencil mark. That's okay because that's going to be covered up by the satin stitch and I'm also like cutting right along it. So if that happens, don't freak out. But I just don't want it to be something that's going to bleed like a marker or something. So that's why I tend to use pencil or pen. But so here's our shield shape. You can see it's just our basic shape here. And then now I've already peeled off the heat and bond, but if you hadn't, at this point you would peel it off and then we're going to iron this onto our tunic or whatever we're making. So let's go back over to the ironing board. I'm sorry if moving the camera around makes anyone dizzy. I hope it doesn't. So now again, we've got our iron still hot. We've got our base tunic piece. Or our base fabric piece. Imagine it's a tunic. And I'm just going to iron this again real quick just to double ensure that it's flat. And again, you can see this is where you can kind of see that grain coming into play. So this is cut on the grain. You can kind of see how the threads run here. And then our applique piece is also cut on the grain. I don't know if you can see it on the yellow, but it's there. So we're going to place this up and down where we want it positioned. If you have like a tunic or something and you want to make super sure that it's centered, you could measure it and find like the middle and make a mark and line up your stuff that way. For the sake of this, I'm just going to eyeball it because it's just an example. But this, like if this was the top of a tunic, this is why I sew up the shoulders, because the collar, if you have like a decorative collar, is going to come down a little bit. So I want to make sure that my applique piece is not too close to the collar. So that's why I do it that way. And then once it's placed where you want it, I'm gonna just iron it down. Again, follow whatever instructions your fusible interfacing says to use. Some brands you want to like leave it sit there for a minute and really like make sure that it's stuck because you don't want it to like come up as you're working with it. That's annoying. But for this brand, you don't really have to leave it that long. It just works. And now we have one piece essentially. And of course, this is 2 layers. So it's always going to be a little thicker where the applique is. And that's where you have to be careful with getting multiple layers of applique because it will get really thick and stiff after a while. So I'm going to go ahead and move over to the sewing machine. If anyone has questions, please shout them out and bear with me just a moment. I'm going to turn off my iron. Okay, so this is my sewing machine and my sewing desk. Here we are. Oops. Okay, so at this point, you don't really need your design anymore. So I'm just going to set that aside. And I'm going to cut a piece of stabilizer that's, again, slightly bigger than the design. And this is my roll of stabilizer. I got it on Amazon for like 30 bucks and it lasts forever. But you can get it at, craft stores or whatever. If you're doing something like a trim, you want to, you may need to like cut it in strips and layer multiple pieces depending on the size of your roll. And that's totally okay. It's not really going to hurt anything. So here's my stabilizer, a little bit bigger. I'm going to flip this over. So I'm now on the back of the piece. And I'm going to pin the stabilizer to the back. And you want to make sure that it has covered the applique still, and you can kind of tell just by feeling it around the edge that that's a thicker area, or you can flip it over and just kind of eyeball it, but that's why I cut it bigger to make sure it covers everything. I'm just going to pin this at the corners. If you have iron-on stabilizer, this is the part where you would iron it in place. Sometimes I'll still pin the iron-on stuff because I don't trust it, but depends on how experienced you are with it. Okay. Oh gosh, how are we? It's 12:44. I realize we're kind of a little slow on time here. We're doing a little badly on time here, but I will get through the rest of this as quickly as possible. Okay.
There is not another class in this room until 1 o'clock. So if you go a little over, that's okay.
Okay, thank you. I'm always like, it depends on how quickly and how many questions we have. So, okay. And this is being recorded. So if anyone has to leave, then you can watch it later. So here's our piece with our stabilizer. I'm now gonna pull up my sewing machine. I've already got it threaded. So you can see I've got my embroidery thread on top, and you can see how it's, you can see how it's shinier than like a regular roll of all-purpose thread. So like I've got this red that I'm using as my bobbin thread, and it's not quite the same color, but it's pretty close. but you can see how much shinier the embroidery thread is, and that's Sulky brand. And I've got my bobbin threaded, so I'm gonna try to figure out the best angle for you guys here. Move you around a little bit. Oops, not quite. There we go. Okay, and again, you can use embroidery thread in both your bobbin and your top. I just like to save a little money by using all-purpose thread. So we want to set our tension maybe so that the top is pulling on it slightly less. So if your average is like a 4, I maybe start out with a 3 just to be safe, because we don't want that all-purpose thread to, you know, show up down the line. So, and we're going to set our machine to a zigzag stitch. So mine is a 4, but whatever yours is. And then you're going to set the width depending on the width of your fabric. So for this one, it's a pretty solid piece. It's a pretty big design. So I'm going to do the maximum width, also because it, you know, will let you guys see it a little bit better. And I'm also using this red thread because it just kind of helps you guys see the applique a little bit better. You can use matching thread, of course, as well. So I'm also going to set the length of my stitch basically as low as it will go without being 0. So mine is a digital machine, so it's like a 0.1. But if yours has a knob, I used to, when I had that type of sewing machine, I would just set it to 0 and then do it like the tiniest bit up from 0. Because if you do it right at 0, it's not going to go anywhere, but you want it to be, you know, tight as well. And then I'm going to position it. You can kind of see how I'm positioning my needle so that it is right at the edge of the fabric. So I want most of my stitch to be inside the fabric and just barely covering the edge. You don't want the fabric to show, but by having it more in, then it's going to cover more of the fabric, which makes it more stable, and it's less likely to like pull up later. So I hope you guys can see that okay. And so I start by putting my needle down just so it doesn't tug out. And then I'm just going to start sewing. And you just want to kind of go slowly at first and just kind of slowly guide it forward. You shouldn't have to like push on it really hard. And that's the stabilizer helps it move smoothly. And it also keeps this design from getting like warped as you kind of tug on it. So we're just going to keep going slowly, following the edge. And really the key to this is just take it slow, practice, you know, as you first start out, and you'll just kind of get more confident with it as you go. I'm getting to a curve here. So I just kind of gradually turn the fabric with the shape. And that's where it helps to have your tunic not sewed up or whatever, so you can move it a lot better. And if I get to a point where I feel like the curve is moving faster than I can turn it, like if it's a really sharp curve, what I'll do is I'll stop, put the needle down on the outer edge, or depends on which direction you're turning. So since I'm kind of turning it to the left or kind of moving left, I want it on the right side. And then I lift my foot, rotate the fabric, and then back down and start again. And that's how you get those nice smooth curves. And if you're doing something with a really tight curve, you're probably gonna have to do that a lot, and that's okay. So I'm just gonna keep going. I'm speeding up a little bit just so we can get through this. But it's okay to go quickly. You just don't want to go so quickly that like you're not in control, I guess, is the moral of the story. And then once I get to the end here at the point, I don't want to go over it too far. So basically I've got it so that the needle is right on the point. Again, it's kind of hard to see here from my phone, but if I lift my foot, maybe you can see it a little better. You can see the needle's kind of right on the point that I'm going to turn on. And then I'm going to rotate the fabric so that I'm starting to go in the other direction. and then put it back down. And one thing some people ask me about is the type of foot. It definitely helps to have an entirely clear plastic foot, or one like this where it has a clear front at least, so that you can see what you're doing. I have used a metal foot. It's just a little bit more difficult. And if your sewing machine doesn't come with like a clear plastic foot, or like a one with a clear or open front, you can get one, for pretty cheaply. So I'm gonna just keep going up the side, and I'm gonna stop here just to kind of show you guys what it looks like. And you pull out and trim off your thread, of course. And then you can see you have like this smooth, satiny looking stitch, and you will see like a little bit of like more dots around the edge, like more light coming through, but that's okay. If I can get it in the light, you can see how shiny it is better, but oh gosh. So you can kind of see how it's shiny. You may notice you can see some of the background color coming through a little bit. And that's definitely going to be more true with contrasting colors like this. But if you ever notice that, like if your stitches don't seem tight enough, typically when you see that super smooth, super tight applique, they've gone over it twice. So you do the whole stitching once, and then you go over it again. And that seems really painstaking, but that's how you get that look. If you're using, like, I've noticed darker colors with a matching thread will show through less. It's less obvious. So if you don't want to go over it twice, that's how you get away with it. But just in general, that's what you do. And then I'm going to show you, I'm going to go over this once more. Whoops, I didn't cut that. Oh, okay. So I'm going to go over a small section of this again, and then show you how I tie off my applique. Oh no, sorry about that. Whoops. Okay. Ah, sorry, my tripod has decided to be unstable right now, of all times. Okay. Hopefully that stays. So on the first pass through, if you're doing a second pass through, I just clip off my threads completely on both the beginning and the end. But if you are doing the second pass through, we're going to do it a little differently. So I'll show you how that looks. And you can see on the back here how my thread looks a little different, because that is the all-purpose thread. And I would rather have some of the embroidery thread show on the back than have some of the all-purpose thread show on the front. But you can experiment with your tension and kind of see what works for you. All right, so I've trimmed that. I'm just gonna go over like this little end piece so I can show you how I tie it off. So like, again, if you're going over it the second time, just kind of pick a place to start. It doesn't really matter where you start. And then just go over it again. And you may notice it's a little more difficult as you go over it the second time. And especially with thicker fabrics or like multiple layers, you're going to have a harder time pushing through. That's where that stabilizer is important, and just take it slow and, do the best you can. And eventually, like, you may find that some super thick fabrics are just not conducive to applique, and that's just how it is. So after my second pass through, you can again see how shiny that is. Whoops, if I can get it angled right here. You can kind of see how shiny that is. And you can see how much like smoother. Uh-oh, did I freeze? There we go. Come on. You can kind of see how much smoother that is than where it was before. And it just looks more solid. So now to finish it, or to tie it off, because I don't want my threads to come unraveled. Ooh, oh my God. Okay, I'm sorry. Tripod is not cooperating with me today. It tried so hard. Okay. Let's try that. So because I don't want my threads to unravel and ruin my beautiful applique, so what I'm gonna do is flip. I've got these long threads that I've left. Kind of, you can see I've kind of got these long extra threads. So I'm gonna flip it over. And you can see I've got my back thread as well. And I'm going to take my seam ripper or just a pencil or whatever, or your scissors or whatever skinny object you have, because I can't find my seam ripper. Oh. Okay, well, that's fine. So I'm going to take this thread, this back thread, and kind of tug on it. And you can see, if you look really closely, there's a loop of the front thread coming through to the back. So I'm just going to grab it and pull it through. And now I've got 2 threads there. And then I'm going to tie a knot. And if you're on your second layer, you may find that it's not coming through. Like if it doesn't tug very easily, if it feels like you're going to tear it trying to pull it through, then just don't worry about it. Just snip it off and dab it with some fray check, because if it's not going to pull through easily, it's not going to come undone easily. So I'm just going to tie that in a simple knot and then trim off my threads. Oops. And I'm going to leave a little bit of like tails because I don't want that knot to come undone, but you don't want to leave like a big long thread there either. And then I'm going to take my fray check, which this is what it's just a little bottle of clear stuff. And I like to use a Q-tip or something like that to kind of dab it on, because that just gives me more control over it. And you can reuse the same Q-tip multiple times, or you can dab it directly, but be careful not to put too much, because if it bleeds through, it can possibly stain your fabric, and you don't want that. So I'm going to just dab it on my Q-tip just a little bit, and then dab it right there on that knot so that it stays in place. And I just do that anywhere that I have threads. So like at the beginning and end of your stitch, you just do that everywhere. And that's pretty much it. Once you're done, you trim up all your threads, and then you've got your applique piece. Yeah. Any questions about that at this point?
I'm going to go ahead and end the recording here.
Yeah, sounds good.